Alright everyone, of course today we start off with a general update on the Ukraine situation. We have multiple subtopics, not all of which are YouTube friendly, so keep in mind, if you're one of the many people, by the way, that just subscribed to the channel the other day during the live stream, I make exclusive content every day on other platforms. I also stream on both Twitch and Rumble as well. YouTube no longer allows you to talk frankly about many subjects, so if I'm talking about Ukrainian refugees, hint, hint, I may do that later, it's going to have to be an exclusive. So links in a pinned comment down below. You can join me on one or more of those platforms. That's where you'll get the real skinny on geopolitics, as well as my opinions about basically anything YouTube has a problem with and is paying CNN already to rant about. It's a disinfo campaign. It's what it is by the legacy media. Anyway, we got to talk about SWIFT first. Here's my thoughts here. Biden is completely hamstrung right now. He looked weak last night when he was giving an update about the legendary sanctions we're putting on the Russians. He got grilled even by the legacy media hawks that normally circle the wagons around him. Even they, and not just Peter Doocy, although he got chuckled at a couple times, even people from like ABC, NBC News were grilling Joe Biden, hey, why aren't you doing more, especially with regards to SWIFT. Now, SWIFT would be a much more major sanction than what Russia faces now. Right now, it's individual businesses, etc. U.S. and similar Western groups won't do business with them. But they can do normal banking inside of their sphere with China, etc. Eliminating them from SWIFT would undercut the capability of virtually all Russians to engage in normal banking procedures. That is, they would be partially shut out of the entire world's economic system. When that's on top of half your stock market disappearing overnight, that would be a biting sanction. But it clearly would not deter Putin. And that's why the Germans, by the way, aren't doing this. They're already saying, look, Europe, because we stupidly decided to go with Nord Stream instead of pressuring the U.S. administration to continue pumping out more oil and gas so that we could get it from at least a group that's actually allied with us, instead of screwing ourselves by eliminating Russia from SWIFT, causing spiraling economic damage that will cripple the European economy, we'll do more mild sanctions and hope that it slows Putin down. This is just an attrition step to try to slow Putin down while Ukrainian civilian militias, etc., grind them down and make it unprofitable to continue beyond the regions that they will clearly take over in eastern Ukraine. By the way, it is beyond the pale that Russian forces are anywhere else, considering Putin's basic justification. Now it sounds more like world policing. I'm wondering if the Caleb Maupins of the world will admit that he sounded an awful lot like George W. Bush, Vladimir Putin did the other day, but that's a different subtopic I'll cover in a moment. I think if you really want to pressure Russia, you get China out of SWIFT. You do what Trump was doing and you sanction the Chinese. You do a trade war with them because who's the financer of all of BRICS, of which Russia's a major member? It's China. They're the moneyed interest, not Russia. Russia's economy is the size of Italy's. They're barely in the top 10 economies. Depending on who you ask, they might be number 11 at any given point. They're not a major economic power. They're really not. They're barely in the top 10. Arguably not quite there. And that over time, again, their economy has instability issues, sort of like the Turkish economy. Erdogan loved fighting for that top 10 spot too. He's like, yes, I made it on the list. Haha. I was just inside the top quarter of my class. As far as SWIFT goes, kicking Russia out of it will do nothing. Because Russia's economy, it doesn't matter if it takes a hit. They're the manpower and the firepower. China is the bag of money. Go after China. But again, as I pointed out yesterday, the Western politicians all have investments in China. Billions and billions of dollars and many trillions more of total wealth is held there by people from the West who wanted to make more money. We should never have opened up to China. We should reverse course on that. And then Russia? Fuck Russia. Don't do anything about the Russians. They can't go beyond Ukraine because everyone else on their border's spoken for. They're in NATO, so he can't invade them, or they're a Russian satellite like Belarus. Okay, problem solved. Who fucking gives a shit at that point? The Ukrainians have to suffer. Again, by the way, I'll have to address how their refugees will be treated as opposed to those of a different complexion, perhaps. SWIFT, who cares? But Biden looked very, very weak because he got cock-blocked by the Germans. They made the decision not to allow SWIFT sanctions. Again, Germany made the decision on Nord Stream. Germany made the decision on SWIFT. The Germans are leading the campaign. Just to be clear, Germany is now the main antagonist of Russia in this situation. Because the Ukrainian government doesn't count. Their civilian militias are a non-state entity. Diplomatically, it's Germany. Germany versus Russia. Where have we seen this before? Could this possibly escalate into a bigger problem? No, that's just a conspiracy theory. Then, let's talk briefly about PSYOPs, propaganda, and a growing urban legend in Kyiv. That is the ghost of Kyiv. Supposedly there is one particular Ukrainian pilot who's flying non-stop sorties and already claims 6 downed MiG fighters. Here's a great lesson in what I spoke of days ago, which is the ultimate wartime PSYOP. There is so much disinfo, so much confusion, and so much opinion masquerading as fact that comes from sources that aren't anywhere near the conflict zone that nobody can rightfully say what is or is not true. It doesn't matter whether it's from Ukrainian or Russian news sources. It doesn't matter if it's from a politician. Ultimately, the main filter people use for this info is whether they want to believe the source. They can't verify the material, so they just say, well, this is my trusted source. You get it from Razor Fist. He gets it from Tim Pool. Another person, the low IQ one, gets it from CNN. Well, you're going to trust them, so they're feeding you potentially propaganda. The hope is that the independent sources are less engaged in such behavior, unless they happen to be breadliners or commies in general. This idea of a ghost of Kyiv sounds a lot to me like, hey, people are just seeing these sorties in the air, and to non-demoralize people, they basically insinuated that there was a supernatural presence overhead keeping them safe. Well, you see that Russian downed fighter? The ghost of Kyiv, almost like a superhero. The ghost of Kyiv got him. The Black Tiger of Vietnam, he knows how to clear out those caverns. He has no problem with it. He hunts around the night, kills Viet Cong, and then they make like cartoon characters and comics and shit out of these things. That being said, it could also be very easily true. 6 down fighters within a day's span is not impossible. It's unlikely for any individual pilot, but in this particular case, it's not impossible. Does the ghost of Kyiv exist, or is it basically a moralization stand-in PSYOP? I have no fucking clue. The thing is that nobody else does either, including the people of Kyiv. The only person that would know would be the pilot themselves, who may or may not even exist, as well as those adjacent. He writes back to mom from his cockpit. Then while his plane is refueling for 15 minutes, he hands off the letter and then maybe goes off to his doom. And of course, David Bowie's playing in the background, and it's very patriotic and Ukrainian colors. This is the nature of war propaganda. So it's an interesting story. It may or may not even fucking exist. I give fairly good odds that there is some crazy lone pilot there with a high kill count, though. The Ukrainians are battle-hardened at this point after years of fighting separatists, so yeah, their air force is fairly decent. Not as big as Russia's, but just as advanced, actually. Then, we've got to talk about something else. This is another quasi-PSYOP, actually. And that's the mobilization of the civilian force in and around Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine. Now, supposedly, the government of Ukraine has effectively said, all citizens take up arms, take up your weapons, build the barricades, kill the Russians, make Molotovs and use them. By the way, Molotov cocktails thrown by groups of people are extremely effective against armored vehicles. Not tanks. I don't think it'll do anything. That might trigger the explosive armor. I don't know how that would work. As far as troop carriers, trucks full of fuel designed to maintain supply lines deep into Ukraine, all those things are real flammable, dude. Just pointing that out. It's something people should keep in mind, even though gas prices are so high, they'll have to use some different propellant. I guess they'll have to use vodka or something. They'll use the really high-grade vodka, the stuff from Poland, maybe. Here's the thing. Mobilizing your civilian population, up to and including saying, hey, you don't have to be 18 to be taking part in this, just go fucking fight, makes sense rationally. Moscow's intent initially may very well have been just, hey, we're recognizing these 2 break-off regions, and I think initially Putin was hoping just to bully Ukraine into pulling back so it didn't have to do a full-scale invasion. Instead, everyone started prepping, so it said, fuck. Now it has to invade the whole Ukraine, and their essential goal is the overthrow of the Ukrainian government. This is beginning to look more like their diplomatic effort soured, and they decided to convert it into a military effort than that Putin even gives a shit about the eastern Ukrainian break-off regions. than those particular states. It's beginning to look like this. When he's using the justification, we're denazifying the country. We're protecting democracy, using a bunch of terms, by the way, that the U.S. left likes to use. Denazification? Yeah. Putin is one to speak. It sounded a little bit like George W., by the way. I wonder if Caleb Maupin will be saying, hey, maybe I've soured on Putin. He seems a little bit too much like Western leaders now to me. I don't think that that'll happen. When you're bought off by RT, you know where your paycheck's coming from. Just saying. Brags about having been on TV. A little bit like being on shortwave radio, and I wouldn't listen to Review Bra berate me over the situation either. I would militarize the civilians too. Yeah, and to the Ukrainians, yeah, you should probably make some Molotovs. Yeah, you should get involved. Your nation is under attack by a foreign entity that may or may not annex everything. They may go well beyond the eastern Ukrainian region. The fact is that Western forces are pulling back. Without them there to potentially be cannon fodder and start a major international incident, Putin doesn't care how many Ukrainians he flattens. It's a Russian tradition to kill off bunches of Ukrainians. You'll remember the Holodomor many years ago. Another reason why. I wonder why the Ukrainian government doesn't get along so well with Vladimir Putin. Could it be understanding history? Who knows? And again, by the way, I should probably point out I'm against the whole kerfuffle here. There shouldn't be any war. Russia shouldn't have invaded. NATO cannot directly do anything about it. There's nothing to be done other than arm the Ukrainians. Give their civilians heavy weapons. Yeah, hand them out like candy. We've got so many guns in the U.S. Make a care box for them and airlift 1 million or so rockets onto them. We can produce them. We can make that in a week. I just hope that we do that domestically as well, and I think we should be pressuring the rest of Europe to abandon all gun control. In fact, people should be mandated to have body armor and guns. They should have to. They shouldn't even be allowed not to have military-style weapons. Real ones, not the AR-15, by the way. We need far more guns. Yeah, good guns make good neighbors. It makes you less likely to fuck around because you'll more likely find out. That's the whole fucking point. It's also why you build fences. It's why there are security systems. It's why we have a so-called criminal justice system to try to penalize people for violating others' rights. Well, that's not really how it works, but that's the idea that's sold to people. Guns are a great equalizer. By the way, Ukraine probably shouldn't have given up its nuclear weapons. At one point, it had one of the top nuclear stockpiles in the world, but it decided stupidly to destroy them in exchange for maybe eventually being protected by NATO. Whoops! I guess you can't always count on the Western countries of the world. So yeah, that's a little bit of an update here. Again, I will be making as well exclusive content that deals with the Ukraine issue, but is more frank, in which on platforms where I can say what I want to, and I don't have to avoid issues like refugees and things like that, either for algorithmic or direct censorship purposes. That's about all. Peace out.